The year was 1887, and the Dakota Territory was no place for mercy. Lightning split the black sky like God's own whip, and thunder rolled across the endless prairie with the fury of 1,000 stampeding buffalo. Most folks knew better than to be caught out in such weather, but fate had a way of putting people exactly where they didn't want to be. Tonight, it would bring together two souls who never expected to find warmth in the coldest of storms. Ezekiel Zeke Morrison had been riding fence for the Double Bar Ranch when the storm hit. His weathered hands gripped the reins as his horse, Thunder, fought against the howling wind. Rain came down in sheets so thick he could barely see his horse's ears, let alone the trail ahead. He'd been through plenty of storms in his 32 years, but this one had teeth. The ranch was still 5 miles south, and finding shelter seemed impossible until he heard it, a cry so desperate it cut through the storm, like a knife through leather. At first, he thought it might be a coyote or wounded animal, but as Thunder picked his way carefully across the muddy ground, the sound came again. This time, there was no mistaking it. Someone was out there, and they were in trouble. Zeke had learned long ago that in this harsh land, you helped folks when you could, because someday you might be the one needing help. He guided Thunder toward the sound, his keen eyes searching through the driving rain. Lightning flashed again, and for just a moment, he saw her, a young woman huddled against a fallen cottonwood, her dress torn and muddy, her dark hair plastered to her head by the relentless rain. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice barely carrying over the storm's roar. "Mum, can you hear me?" The woman looked up, and even in the dim light, he could see the fear and exhaustion in her eyes. She tried to stand but stumbled, clearly at the end of her strength. Zeke dismounted quickly, his boots splashing in the growing puddles. "It's all right, miss. I'm here to help." He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her further. Up close, he could see she was shivering violently, her lips blue with cold. I got lost," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "My horse threw me. Ran off when the thunder started." "What's your name, miss?" Zeke asked gently, removing his oilskin coat and wrapping it around her shoulders. "Evangeline," she whispered. "Evangeline Hayes. I was riding back to town from the Murphy place when the storm caught me." Zeke knew the Murphy spread. It was a good 15 miles from here, and town was even farther. This woman had been out in the storm for hours, and hypothermia was setting in fast. He had to get her warm and dry, or she wouldn't make it through the night. "Well, Miss Hayes, I'm Zeke Morrison, and I'm going to get you somewhere safe." He looked around, trying to remember the lay of the land. Then it came to him there was an old line shack about 2 miles west, built into a hillside for protection from the wind. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. "Can you ride?" he asked, though he could see she was barely able to stand. Evangeline nodded weakly, but when Zeke helped her toward Thunder, her knees buckled. Without hesitation, he swept her up in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, and he could feel how cold she was even through his coat. "I'm going to put you up on Thunder, and I'll walk alongside," he explained. "There's a shelter not far from here." Getting her onto the horse took some doing, but Thunder was well-trained and stood perfectly still despite the storm raging around them. Zeke took the reins and began leading the way, one hand on Thunder's bridle, the other ready to catch Evangeline. If she started to fall, the 2 miles felt like 20 in the storm, but finally, Zeke spotted the dark outline of the line shack nestled against the hillside. It was little more than a one-room cabin with a stone chimney, but right now it looked like a palace. The door was stuck, swollen from the rain, but Zeke's shoulder made quick work of it. Inside, it was dry but cold and dark. He helped Evangeline down from the horse and guided her inside while Thunder waited patiently under the small overhang that served as a lean-to. "Stay right here by the door," Zeke told her. "I'm going to get a fire started." His hands worked quickly in the darkness, feeling for the supplies he knew would be there. Every line shack on the territory was stocked with basics: firewood, matches in a waterproof tin, coffee, beans, hardtack. His fingers found the matches first, and soon he had a small flame dancing in the stone fireplace. The light revealed a simple but sturdy room with a wooden bunk, a small table, and shelves lined with supplies. More importantly, There were dry blankets and extra clothes hanging from pegs on the wall. Evangeline stood by the door, still wrapped in his coat, watching the fire grow. In the flickering light, Zeke got his first good look at her. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 22 or 23, with delicate features and intelligent dark eyes. Even bedraggled from the storm, there was something about her that made his breath catch. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said practically, turning away to give her privacy while he tended the fire. "There are dry things on the wall there. I'll step outside while you change. Please don't go back out in the storm." Evangeline said quietly, "I'll manage." Zeke nodded and faced the fire, feeding it more wood until the flames danced high and began to throw real warmth into the room. Behind him, he heard the rustle of wet fabric and tried to focus on anything other than the woman changing. "Clothes just a few feet away. Undecent," she said finally, and he turned to see her wrapped in a wool blanket, her wet dress hanging from a peg near the fire to dry. The dry clothes she'd chosen were clearly men's gear, a flannel shirt and wool pants that were far too big for her small frame, but they were warm and dry. "Better?" Zeke asked, and she nodded, some color already returning to her cheeks. "Much better. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." Zeke shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. Any decent man would have done the same. He moved to the shelves and began gathering supplies. "You need something hot in you. Coffee and some food." As he worked, preparing coffee over the fire and opening tins of beans, Evangeline settled onto the wooden bunk, pulling the blanket tight around her. The storm continued to rage outside, but in the small cabin, with the fire crackling and warmth beginning to fill the space, it felt like they were in their own private world. "What were you doing at the Murphy place?" Zeke asked as he stirred the beans in a small pot. "I'm a teacher," Evangeline explained, "the new schoolmarm in Millbrook. Mrs. Murphy's youngest has been having trouble with his reading, so I've been going out there twice a week to work with him." Zeke glanced at her with new respect. Teachers were rare out here, especially women brave enough to come to frontier towns. "That's good work. How long have you been in Millbrook?" "Just 3 months. I came out from Boston after I finished my training." She paused, then added with a small smile, "My family thinks I've lost my mind, coming out to the middle of nowhere." "What made you come?" Zeke asked, genuinely curious. Most Eastern women who ventured west did so because they had to, not because they wanted to. Evangeline was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "I wanted to make a difference, I suppose. In Boston, I would have been just another teacher in a school full of teachers. Out here, I can actually help children who might not get an education otherwise." The coffee was ready, and Zeke poured it into tin cups, handing one to Evangeline. She wrapped her hands around it gratefully, inhaling the steam. "What about you?" she asked. "Have you been in the territory long?" Zeke settled into the chair by the table, his own coffee warming his hands. "Born and raised. My pa came out here in '68, right after the war. Started the double bar with nothing but a dream and a lot of stubbornness." "Is it your ranch now?" "Was," Zeke said simply. "Pa died 2 winters ago, pneumonia. I had to sell to pay his debts, but the new owner kept me on as foreman." There was something in his voice that made Evangeline look at him more closely. She could see the loss there, the quiet strength of a man who'd faced hardship and kept going. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Zeke shrugged again, but he appreciated her words. "Life out here isn't easy. You learn to take what comes and be grateful for what you have." They drank their coffee in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the storm. The beans were ready, and Zeke served them up with hardtack. It wasn't fancy food, but it was hot and filling, and Evangeline ate hungrily. "Tell me about your students," Zeke said as they ate. "What are they like?" Evangeline's face lit up. "They're wonderful, challenging, but wonderful. I have 12 students, ranging from 6 to 15 years old. Most of them have never had proper schooling before, so we're starting from the beginning with some of them." She told him about little Tommy Peterson, who was brilliant with numbers but struggled with letters, and about Mary Sullivan, who could read better than children twice her age, but was shy about speaking up in class. As she talked, Zeke found himself watching her face, seeing the passion and dedication there. "Sounds like you found your calling," he said when she paused. "I think I have. Though I have to admit, there are challenges I never expected." Evangeline hesitated, then seemed to decide he was someone she could trust. Some of the parents don't see the value in educating their daughters. They think I'm filling the girls' heads with nonsense, teaching them things that will make them dissatisfied with ranch life. Zeke nodded thoughtfully. "That's a common attitude out here. Women's roles are pretty clearly defined, but they shouldn't be." Evangeline said with sudden fire, "A woman should have the right to choose her own path, to use her mind and talents however she sees fit." Zeke found himself smiling at her passion. "You're not like most women I've met." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. "It's an interesting thing," Zeke replied diplomatically, which made her laugh. The sound of her laughter was like music in the small cabin, and Zeke realized with surprise that he was enjoying himself. It had been a long time since he'd had a real conversation with anyone, especially a woman as intelligent and spirited as Evangeline. Outside, the storm was beginning to lose some of its fury. Though rain still drummed steadily on the roof, the fire had warmed the cabin thoroughly, and with food in their bellies and dry clothes on their backs, both of them were feeling much better. "Thank you," Evangeline said suddenly. "Not just for rescuing me, but for treating me like a person worth talking to." Zeke looked at her curiously. "Why wouldn't I? You'd be surprised how many men think a woman's opinions aren't worth hearing, especially about serious matters. Then they're fools." Zeke said simply, and meant it. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of mutual respect and growing attraction. Evangeline felt it too, and she found herself really looking at this man who had saved her life. He was tall and lean, with the kind of strength that came from hard work rather than show. His face was weathered but kind, with laugh lines around his eyes and a mouth that looked like it smiled often, though it was serious now. There was something steady about him, something that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt since coming west. "What will you do when the storm passes?" she asked. "Get you back to town safe and sound," Zeke replied. "Then back to work, I suppose." "Do you like the work? Being a ranch foreman?" Zeke considered the question. "It's honest work. I'm good at it. But sometimes I wonder what else is out there." "What would you do if you could do anything?" "That's a dangerous question," Zeke said with a half smile. "Why dangerous?" "Because it makes a man think about dreams he's put aside." Evangeline leaned forward, interested. "What dreams?" Zeke was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I always thought I might like to have my own place again someday. Not a big operation. Just something small and manageable. Maybe raise horses instead of cattle. I've always had a way with horses." "That sounds wonderful. What's stopping you?" "Money. Mostly, land's expensive, and good horses cost more than I make in a year. But not impossible." Zeke looked at her, seeing the encouragement in her eyes. "No, not impossible. Just distant. Dreams have a way of getting closer when you talk about them," Evangeline said softly. They talked through the night as the storm gradually wore itself out. They shared stories of their childhoods, their hopes, their fears. Zeke told her about growing up on the ranch, learning to ride before he could properly walk, helping his father build their dream from nothing. Evangeline spoke of her life in Boston, the expectations placed on her as a proper young lady, and her rebellion against the life that felt too small for her ambitions. As dawn approached, the rain finally stopped, though the wind continued to blow. Gray light began to filter through the small window, and both of them realized they had been talking all night. "I should check on Thunder," Zeke said, rising and stretching muscles that had grown stiff from sitting. Outside, the world looked washed clean. The air was fresh and cool, and puddles reflected the lightening sky. Thunder nickered softly when he saw Zeke, and after checking that the horse was unharmed, Zeke returned to the cabin. Evangeline had dressed in her own clothes, which had dried by the fire overnight. She looked tired, but much better than she had. When he'd found her, ready to head back to town, Zeke asked, "I suppose I should be," she said. But there was reluctance in her voice that matched his own feelings. The ride back to Millbrook took most of the morning. Thunder carried both of them easily, and Evangeline rode behind Zeke, her arms around his waist. It was an intimate position that neither of them mentioned, but both were acutely aware of. They talked less on the ride, both knowing that once they reached town, this strange, wonderful night would be over. They would return to their separate lives, he to the ranch, she to her school, and it was unlikely their paths would cross again in any meaningful way. Millbrook was a small town, typical of the territory, a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church, a saloon, a general store, and not much else. The schoolhouse sat at the far end of town, a neat white building with a bell tower. Zeke stopped Thunder in front of the boarding house where Evangeline lived. Mrs. Hartwell, the proprietor, came rushing out as soon as she saw them. "Evangeline, thank heavens you're safe. When you didn't come back last night, I was beside myself with worry." Evangeline slid down from the horse, and Zeke dismounted as well. "I got caught in the storm. Mrs. Hartwell, Mr. Morrison here found me and provided shelter." Double quotes Mrs. Hartwell looked Zeke up and down with a critical eye. "Well, I suppose we owe you thanks, young man." "No thanks necessary, ma'am," Zeke said politely, touching the brim of his hat. "Evangeline, you get inside and into some proper clothes this instant. People are already talking about you being out all night with a man." Evangeline's cheeks flushed, but her chin lifted defiantly. "Let them talk. Mr. Morrison behaved as a perfect gentleman. Nevertheless, appearances matter. Get inside." Zeke could see the frustration in Evangeline's eyes, but she nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Hartwell." She turned to Zeke. "Thank you again, Mr. Morrison, for everything. Take care of yourself." "Miss Hayes," Zeke said formally, though his eyes said much more. As Evangeline disappeared into the boarding house, Zeke remounted Thunder and headed out of town. He had work to do, and the longer he stayed, the more tongues would wag. But as he rode away, he found himself looking back at the neat white schoolhouse and thinking about the remarkable woman he'd spent the night talking with. Over the next few weeks, Zeke found himself thinking about Evangeline Hayes more than he cared to admit. He wondered how she was doing, whether her students were progressing, if she was settling in well to frontier life. Twice he found excuses to ride through Millbrook, hoping for a glimpse of her, but he never saw her. Evangeline, for her part, was dealing with the aftermath of their night together. True to Mrs. Hartwell's prediction, the town gossips had seized on the story of the schoolmarm spending the night with a cowboy. Some of the parents were talking about finding a new teacher, one with better judgment and moral character. The criticism stung, but Evangeline refused to be ashamed of what had happened. Zeke Morrison had saved her life and treated her with nothing but respect. If people wanted to make something sorted out of that, it said more about them than it did about her. She threw herself into her work with renewed vigor, determined to prove her worth as a teacher. Her students responded well to her dedication, and slowly the gossip began to die down. But she often found herself thinking about that night in the line shack, about the easy conversation and the feeling of being truly understood by someone. It was nearly a month later when their paths crossed again. Evangeline was walking back from the Murphy Ranch, having once again tutored young Billy Murphy in his reading, when she saw a familiar figure on horseback in the distance. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized Zeke's easy posture in the saddle. He must have seen her too, because he changed direction and rode toward her. As he got closer, she could see that he looked tired and dusty, as if he'd been working hard. "Miss Hayes," he said, touching his hat brim as he stopped Thunder beside her. "Good to see you." "Mr. Morrison," she replied, trying to keep her voice casual despite the flutter in her chest. "How have you been?" "Can't complain." "You, well enough." She paused, then asked, "How is everything at the ranch?" Zeke's expression darkened slightly. "Actually, that's why I'm out this way. We've had some trouble with rustlers. Lost about 50 head of cattle last week." "Rustlers? That's terrible. Have you contacted the sheriff?" "Sheriff's doing what he can, but it's a big territory and not much law to go around." Zeke studied her face. "You be careful walking out here alone, Miss Hayes. There are dangerous men about." The concern in his voice warmed her. "I will be. I always carry this." She showed him a small derringer tucked into her reticule. Zeke's eyebrows rose. You know how to use that. My father insisted I learn before I came west. He said it might save my life someday. Smart man. But still, a small gun like that isn't much good against multiple men. Are you offering to escort me? Mr. Morrison. The words came out more flirtatiously than she intended, and she blushed. Zeke's eyes warmed. If you'd like the company, I'd be happy to see you safely to town. They walked together, Zeke leading Thunder, and fell back into the easy conversation they had shared that stormy night. Evangeline told him about her students, progress, and Zeke shared stories from the ranch. It felt natural and comfortable, like continuing a conversation that had been interrupted rather than starting a new one. I heard there was some talk in town, Zeke said carefully as they neared Millbrook. About that night, Evangeline's jaw tightened. Small minds create small problems. I'm sorry if I caused you trouble. You didn't cause anything. People who want to think the worst will find a way to do it regardless of the truth. Zeke admired her spirit. Still, I don't want to make things harder for you. Then don't stop talking to me because of what others might say, Evangeline said firmly. I value your friendship too much for that. The word friendship hung in the air between them, though both knew there was more to it than that. They had reached the edge of town, and Zeke stopped. I should leave you here, he said reluctantly. Don't want to give the gossips more ammunition. Evangeline wanted to protest, but she knew he was right. Will I see you again? I'd like that. Zeke said honestly. Maybe. Would you like to have dinner sometime? Somewhere we could talk properly. I'd like that very much. There's a hotel in Cedar Falls, about 20 miles north. It's bigger than Millbrook. More anonymous. We could meet there next Sunday, if you're willing to make the ride. Evangeline considered it. Cedar Falls was far enough away that no one from Millbrook would see them, but close enough to reach easily. I'll be there. The Cedar Falls Hotel, round noon. I'll be there, she repeated, and the promise felt like much more than a simple dinner arrangement. The following Sunday, Evangeline told Mrs. Hartwell she was visiting a sick relative in the next county and set out early for Cedar Falls. She had borrowed a horse from the livery stable and made good time. Arriving at the hotel just before noon. Zeke was already there, waiting in the lobby. He had cleaned up for the occasion, wearing his best shirt and jacket, his hair neatly combed. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart race. You came, he said, rising to greet her. Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped you would, but I wasn't sure. The hotel dining room was small but respectable, and they were seated at a table by the window overlooking the main street. Over roast beef and potatoes, they talked about everything and nothing, falling back into the comfortable intimacy they had discovered that first night. I've been thinking about what you said, Zeke told her as they lingered over coffee. About dreams getting closer when you talk about them. Oh, I've been saving money, more than I thought I had, and I heard about a small spread for sale north of here. It's not much, just 160 acres with a small house and barn, but it might be enough to start with. Evangeline's eyes brightened. That's wonderful. Are you going to look at it? I was thinking about it. Would you like to come with me? I'd value your opinion. The invitation was loaded with implications that neither of them voiced, but both understood. I'd be honored to, Evangeline said softly. They made arrangements to meet the following weekend, and as they prepared to leave the hotel, Zeke took her hand. Evangeline, I want you to know, whatever happens, these past weeks, getting to know you, they've meant a lot to me. They've meant a lot to me too, Zeke. He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her how he felt, but they were in a public place, and there were still so many obstacles between them. Instead, he simply squeezed her hand and escorted her to her horse. The property Zeke had heard about was indeed small, but it was beautiful, set in a valley with a creek running through it. The land was green and fertile, perfect for raising horses. The house was modest but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting room. The barn was sturdy, and there were corrals already in place. It's perfect, Evangeline breathed as they stood on the front porch, looking out over the valley. You really think so? Zeke asked, and she could hear the hope in his voice. I think anyone would be lucky to call this place home. Zeke was quiet for a moment. then turned to face her. "Evangeline, I need to tell you something." She could hear the seriousness in his voice and gave him her full attention. "I'm in love with you," he said simply. "I have been since that night. In the line shack, maybe even before. I know it's complicated. I know there are obstacles. But I can't keep pretending it's not true." Evangeline's heart soared, but she forced herself to think practically. "Zeke, I know." He interrupted. "You have your teaching, your independence. I'm not asking you to give that up. Cedar Falls has a school, and they've been looking for a teacher. If I bought this place, if we were together, you could still teach if you wanted to." The offer was everything she hadn't dared to dream of: love, partnership, the freedom to continue her work. But it was also terrifying in its implications. "What are you asking me, exactly?" she said quietly. Zeke took her hands in his. "I'm asking you to marry me. I'm asking you to build a life with me here, in this valley. I'm asking you to take a chance on us." Evangeline looked into his eyes and saw her future there, not the future she had planned, but one that might be even better. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build a life with you. Yes to all of it." Zeke swept her into his arms and spun her round, both of them laughing with joy and relief. When he set her down, he kissed her, and it was everything their careful friendship had been building toward. They were married 6 weeks later in Cedar Falls, with only a few close friends as witnesses. Mrs. Hartwell was scandalized by the sudden engagement, but even she had to admit that Zeke Morrison seemed like a good man who would take care of Evangeline. Zeke bought the property with his savings and a loan from the bank, and they moved into the little house as soon as the papers were signed. Evangeline took the teaching position in Cedar Falls and found the students there just as eager to learn as those in Millbrook had been. Their first winter together was hard. The house was drafty, money was tight, and there was so much work to be done on the property. But they were together, and that made every hardship bearable. By spring, they had their first foal, a beautiful filly with Thunder's strong lines and gentle disposition. Evangeline named her Storm, in honor of the tempest that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" Zeke asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. "Giving up your old life, coming out here with me?" Evangeline leaned against his shoulder, perfectly content. "Never. That storm brought me exactly where I was meant to be, even if it means being married to a stubborn cowboy, especially because of that," she said, smiling up at him. Years later, when their children asked how their parents met, Zeke and Evangeline would tell them about the terrible storm, about how sometimes the worst circumstances can lead to the best outcomes. They would talk about listening for others in need, about taking chances on love, and about how home isn't a place, but the person you choose to weather life's storms with. Their horse ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the territory for producing fine animals with gentle temperaments. Evangeline continued teaching until their first child was born, then returned to it when the children were older, eventually becoming the head of the Cedar Falls School District. But no matter how successful they became, or how their lives changed over the years, they never forgot that stormy night when a cowboy heard a cry in the darkness and followed it to find not just someone to rescue, but someone to love. In saving Evangeline from the storm, Zeke had found his own shelter not from the weather, but from loneliness, and in accepting his help, Evangeline had discovered that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not when you set out to find them, but when you're lost and someone finds you. The love that began in a humble line shack during one of the worst storms in Dakota Territory, history grew into something as enduring as the land itself, proving that sometimes the most unexpected encounters lead to the most extraordinary lives. As for Thunder, the faithful horse who had carried them both to safety that first night, he lived to a ripe old age in their pastures, often surrounded by foals and fillies who would grow up to carry other couples toward their own adventures. And whenever a storm rolled across the valley, Zeke and Evangeline would stand together on their porch, remembering the night when lightning and thunder had conspired to bring two lonely souls together, giving them both exactly what they hadn't even known they were looking for: each other. Now that you've watched the full story, We'd really appreciate it if you could rate it out of 10 in the comments. Your thoughts help us improve and ensure we're bringing you the kind of storytelling you truly enjoy.